Hello, everyone. I'm thrilled to publish my first episode on our academy. For this episode, I had the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Maxime Robert. He's an assistant professor at the University of Laval in Quebec under the Faculty of Medicine in the Department of Rehabilitation. Dr. Robert primarily studies motor learning and control in children with cerebral palsy and identifying the neurological biomarkers that predict motor function in children's upper limbs. In this episode, we discuss his academic background, how his scholastic and personal history shaped his future studies, the nature of cerebral palsy, how it can be rehabilitated, and the neurological benefits that proper rehab brings about in children with this movement disorder. And we also end our conversation by discussing the rather unknown fact that academia is nested in the English language. To support this podcast, please share this episode with your friends and family, subscribe to my YouTube channel, rate it 5 stars on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and most importantly, please leave feedback on my podcast. Any and all comments are welcomed. Thank you for listening to this episode. Thank you for doing this. I really appreciate taking the time. It's really exciting to actually start this project. So to make sure everyone's on board with the same idea, can you tell us about your academic history and where you are now and what's your main topics of focus?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me and good luck with the podcast.
Thank you.
It will be really interesting. So just a brief history about my academic. I started after Cégep, which is a college in...
What year was that?
That was in 2006.
Okay.
2005, 2006, I started in the Cégep in Saint-Lambert in an English college, which I didn't speak English at all at first. Okay. So that was also a challenge to learn my English. So, but that went okay. But I wasn't interested in academic during the Cégep. Mm-hmm. So then I did a social science. So I was
field or specialty in social science?
There was no specialty. I just wanted to have the diploma. So
okay.
And then because I was really interested to go as a police officer at first. Okay. So that was my ultimate goal. But as you know, I'm not allowed to be a police officer because of my handicap. So I have a lower limb amputation.
Can you talk a little bit about that if you feel comfortable?
Yeah, for sure. So basically when I was 10 days after I was born, I got diagnosed with an unknown disease. It's a blood circulation disease.
Okay.
So what happened is after 10 days, I went to Montreal, the pediatric hospital in Montreal. And what they observed is my leg was white and cold. And then a few days later, it became black.
Oh.
So the doctors had no idea what was the cause. We still don't know nowadays.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it was really interesting, I would say, for my parents. It's very challenging also.
I assume that was very stressful.
It was very stressful, at least from what they told me.
Yeah.
So what they did is I spent there for 3 months and a half at the hospital. And during that time, for at least 3 weeks, they kept telling my parents, oh, he's going to pass away in 5 hours, 6 hours, or 10 hours.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's horrific.
I don't remember, lucky enough.
Yeah.
But my parents do remember quite well about the different steps. So at that time, they had to amputate my leg. I also had a heart surgery. I lost a kidney. So all because of that.
All in that 3-month span?
All in that 3-month span.
Wow.
So they really tried to do everything.
Yeah.
And then after 3 months and a half, I went back home.
Yeah.
And since I'm a kid, I until the age of 21 years old, I had over about...
Okay, everything's on.
Yeah. So we already had about 25 surgeries.
Wow.
Up to the age of 21.
Okay, that's like a surgery a year almost.
Yeah, almost a surgery a year. So let's say...
A little bit more, actually.
Yeah, sometimes it was 2 or 3 surgeries a year. But, I mean... You're learning through that. You're like the quality I developed through that. It's very I'm the person who I am nowadays because of that. Or at least I like to believe so.
I would assume so.
Yeah, I would assume so.
It's a pretty strong environmental pushing factor.
Yeah, definitely. But it's also because I was really sportive. So so sometimes I just injured myself, or they had to reconstruct the knee 3 times on my amputee.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm a below the knee amputee.
Yeah.
So I still have the knee, luckily. Yeah. So at least I can do a lot of sports. Well, people with transferable amputee, they can still do sports, but it's harder. Yeah. So yeah, now going back to Cégep. So I really wanted to be a police officer, but I didn't I couldn't do it because of the insurance and the policy. So I applied to go in kinesiology at the Université du Québec à Montréal, a French university, which I got in.
Congrats.
And thank you. So that was in 2007. So about 15, 16 years from now. Yeah. So I did my undergrad in kinesiology, and one of my courses was about neuroscience. And I really liked the novelty of neuroscience. It's not really new, but for me it was new. So I really like the approach of understanding how you move through the brain. Yeah. So what my professor, Régent Dubuc, at that time, he's still a professor at UQAM, but his lab is at University of Montreal. He's doing some neurophysiology.
Like UDM?
UDM, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So he's doing a lot of research in lampreys, which is kind of a fish that goes towards another fish and take the blood.
Okay. So and he studies their neurological qualities, I guess.
Well, he studies the respiratory system in relation to the locomotion system. So it's very fundamental study. So he invited me for a summer internship.
So he has a very like Aquarius lab.
Yes.
Okay,
yeah, you could say that.
Yeah, I'm just like thinking of the environment over there.
Yeah, so you have the animal facilities at another level, and then you go take a lamprey, and then you bring it to the lab. Yeah. And what we did, it's called a liquide ringé. So it's basically how to survive the fish in a specific liquid. So we took out the brain and the locomotion pathways.
Which is a lot of things, actually.
It's a lot of things, especially for a first-year student who had no experience in that field. But it was very interesting. It opens you a lot of possibilities to go. So sometimes when you're in CEGEP or university as a first year, you're not too familiar with the possibilities in research. So he gave me this opportunity. I stayed there for 4 years, led me to...
Which is a very long time for those who don't know. Like staying in one lab at undergrad for 4 years is extraordinarily loyal.
Oh, I meant 4 months. Sorry.
Oh, 4 months. 4 months. Okay.
I'm sorry. My apologies. Yeah.
No worries.
So yeah, it was 4 months. So I meant during the whole summer.
Okay.
But actually, 4 years. I spent 4 years in a different lab. So I'll talk more about this later. So I did 4 months, and then we published 2 papers. I was a third author, which is kind of normal since I was a summer student, but it was a really a good experience. But I figured out it was not for me. I really like the approach with human. Yeah. And let's be honest, talking with fish, lampreys.
It's limited.
It's very limited. It's a very important field, but it is not for me. Yeah. So what happened is after that, I had the chance to go in a different lab for the second summer during my undergrad, which I studied the physiological mechanisms of tremor. So with very fundamental studies with laser, and then just trying to see the physiological tremor, how it is first appear in individuals, healthy adults, etc. So that was a really good.
And you were studying that in humans.
In humans, yeah, in adults.
Yeah.
So that was a really good experience, but again, not something I really enjoyed. And one of the key point about research is you're not going to do a master or a PhD degree if you're not that interested.
That's correct.
As you know.
Yeah.
You have to be very enthusiastic about that work. Yeah. You don't, basically, when you go in the lab, it shouldn't be a burden.
Yeah, of course.
You should wake up and be like, okay, I really want to go. It happens a lot that just before bed, you're thinking about your research. You wake up during the night thinking about your research. And that's how you're going to stand out or to become a professor. You really need to be really involved. Yeah. And it's okay for me to work in healthy adults or elderly, but it's not something that I was really, I don't know how to say it, but I was really enthusiast or really that
there was like a distance that was preventing you from being fully in.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Yeah, that's a better way to say it. So during my third year, we had to do an internship in because it's kinesiology, so it could be in sports or training, and I had the opportunity to do it in research, working in kids with cerebral palsy, so age between 5 to 17, 18 years old. So this professor, Martin Lemay, who's also still a professor at Université du Québec in Montreal, he invited me to do my internship for the full year. And then I did my third summer also, so I got a scholarship for that. So
Congrats.
thank you. So that was the first one I received, and from then I developed my own research studies. So basically, we were interested about the role of virtual reality.
So did you, just to clarify, did you like draft up your own research question, or was that brainstorm? Like, how did that process
So
go?
we brainstormed it with the researcher. Obviously, the researcher had an idea about a specific project, but he was kind enough to introduce me to a few other people, but also to the research aspect. And then we did a lot of brainstorming. So it's a very unique opportunity for a summer student.
Yes, it is.
So that's where I stayed over 4 years in this lab.
Oh, okay.
So it all started because during my undergrad, I started with him. And still a few weeks ago, we received another grant. So we're still collaborating on a weekly basis. So that's
very cool. That's very cool.
He's a very important mentor for me. He introduced me to a lot of research, the downside, the positive side, etc. Okay. But so we discussed about the use of virtual reality for children with cerebral palsy.
And what year was this in?
That was in 2010 to 2012. I did my master degree with him.
Yeah. So that's very early in VR like development. Yeah.
So we have to. We'll be able to redefine what is virtual reality, I'm sure, later on.
Sure.
But I'm also integrating serious gaming. So the use of Kinect, PlayStation, the Wii, Nintendo Wii, etc. Mm-hmm. So in that project, we had the chance to use the Nintendo Wii to promote motor functions or motor recovery in those kids. Yeah. So that was a really interesting pathway. So
at the time, was that very novel as like a research avenue?
It's funny because we had this discussion about a week ago with this supervisor. I used to believe it was very novel, but at the same time, there was over 30 labs around the world doing the same type of research.
In the same population?
In the same population, maybe 5 or 6, 5 to 10 labs.
Okay.
So it was novel, but it was not that novel.
Yeah, you weren't first.
Yeah, we weren't first.
Okay.
We're one of the first study who look at the energy expenditure for those kids. Mm-hmm. So whether you can attain a moderate or too vigorous physical activity. But yeah, we were not the only one who's doing it.
But it's still early though to put it into perspective.
Yeah, and that's also about research is everyone is doing the same thing at the same time. So it's all about a race, who's going to publish first. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to go away from that in a sense that for me, research now is all about collaboration.
Right.
You shouldn't do it by yourself just in your research lab. There's always going to be people around you who's going to be smarter. They're going to be more creative. They're going to have the right people in their lab. So for me, it's very important that everyone try to collaborate together, especially in that population that it's not that common. Yeah. So if you want to increase the sample size, then you have to start collaborating with other people. And especially nowadays, it's a multidisciplinary approach. Yeah. So someone's going to have an expertise in VR or virtual reality. Someone's going to have expertise in AI, neuroscience, rehabilitation, etc. Yeah. So yeah, I did this during my master degree. And then I was really on the field in the sense that I was looking at rehabilitation rather. But I know that cerebral palsy is a neurological disorders, which I'm sure we're going to be able to describe later. So what I decided at least is to do a doctoral training, so to pursue to be an academic scientist. Yeah. So I decided to go to McGill University in the rehab department.
Is that at the Montreal Neurological Institute?
So that's a good question. There's the MNI, the Montreal Neurological Institute, but there's also SPOT. So that's the rehab department. Okay. So the professor, my PhD supervisor, she's from the rehab department, but I was in the neuroscience department.
So you were cross-departmental, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So my main affiliation was neuroscience, but I took courses in the rehab department. Okay. Because I think, especially like individuals with stroke, multiple sclerosis, cerebral palsy, you have to understand how the brain works to improve the efficiency of rehabilitation. Yeah. So to maximize or optimize motor recovery, especially for those kids. So I really wanted to have a better understanding on the different brain mechanisms of brain plasticity, motor recovery, etc.
Right.
So that's why I decided to go in neuroscience. So that was 5 years my doctoral training, which is not necessarily long, but it really depends on the field.
Yeah, definitely.
So some people, let's say you're doing epigenetics.
Yeah. What is epigenetics?
So it's basically the how genes are going to be developed or modified over time.
Yeah.
It's a topic that I'm not too familiar with, or it's not a topic that I'm not interested, but I already have so much to do.
Yeah.
But that takes 5 to 10 years. So some of my friends graduated their doctoral training after 8 years.
Full time. Yeah, that's a long time.
Full time for them, it's about 50 to 60 hours a week.
Yeah, so on average. Sometimes it's longer.
Exactly. So it's very demanding. But for me, I really want to take these two approach, and took 5 years to do the doctoral training. In rehab, so for my doctoral students, usually they try to graduate between 3 or 4 years. So it's very normal in rehab. But in different fields, it always depends on who's your supervisor, which university, which sets of skills that you want to develop. What is the population you're studying? Are you doing animal studies? Are you doing a longitudinal studies? So these are all the factors that you have to take into consideration. So for me, it doesn't mean much whether you're doing your doctoral training in 3 years or 6 years. At the end, it's your skills, whether you're being able to apply it or transfer your knowledge to different fields.
Right.
So for me, that's always what I try to emphasize with my students is, yes, you're doing a doctoral.
It's very healthy.
I hope so.
Yeah.
But as you know, there's ups and downs when you're
course.
doing academic training. So sometimes it's fun, sometimes you're getting discouraged, and that's totally normal. It's also a way to learn how to deal with yourself, to be better yourself.
Yeah. And just before we move into more specified topics, can we emphasize the distinction between doing an undergraduate degree and doing a doctoral degree? What is the exact differences for people who don't know?
Yeah, that's good. So the undergraduate studies is you're going to get a specific set of skills, or a large set of skills about a specific domain.
Yeah.
So for example,
so that's a major, essentially.
Yeah, but a major of 3 years.
Yeah,
3 to 4 years. So it really depends on where you are. So for example, in Canada, the undergrad, it's basically you're getting an undergraduate, so it's a bachelor in science. For at least in my field. So it's 3 to 4 years. So you have all those courses that let's say for occupational therapy or physical therapy, which is I'm a professor in that department in rehabilitation at University of Laval. So you do a 3 years undergrad where you learn a lot of skills about the physiological mechanism of the body. You learn about the clinical sets skills that you're required to do when you're with a patient. You learn about neuroscience. So you learn all those basic skills, or that will help you to go on your career, to have a specific set of skills to help people, etc.
So you're just acquiring a lot of things.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's about 3 to 4 years depending on which program. So for physical therapists, occupational therapists, it's 3 years. And then you do a professional master degree. So in OT and PT, so occupational and physical therapist. So it's a year and a half here, at least in Quebec City, in University of Laval. So in that time, you have more stage. So you go in the hospital.
Internship. For those who don't speak French. Sorry.
Thank you. Yes. No. That's a good that you correct me. Sometimes I'm gonna put some French words. Sometimes you do an internship in different hospitals or rehab center, etc. So basically, you're gonna see on the field how you can apply the set of skills that you learned through the last 3 years, and then you're gonna be able to see a lot of population. So that's the undergraduate / professional master degree you can obtain, at least in this field. And then for a doctoral training, aside the psychology, because sometimes some fields that you're required to do a doctoral training to
practice.
Exactly, as a psychologist, for example. But in our field, and at least in science, when you're doing a doctoral training, is literally to get specific set of skills in terms of science, in terms of research. So, for example, if you want to do qualitative or quantitative studies, you're going to learn how to do the research, how to transcribe all the verbatims, how to do the stats, and then you're going to develop your own research question.
Yeah. So you're producing your own research instead of just consuming what others have already done in undergrad and all that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's correct. So you're really learning how to develop things. So the role, for example, for my role is as a director is to help my students to develop their own research question. Right. So at the end of their doctoral training, I want them to be a better expert in this field than me. So they should know better than me in that specific field they're trying to graduate. So, for example, one of my students is doing neuroimaging techniques in individuals with cerebral palsy. So I expect her to know more than me at the end of the 4 or 5 years training. Okay. So that's how the doctoral training it works, at least in Canada, but most of the places in the world it's like that. At
least for research degrees.
For research degrees, yeah. Exactly. Unless you want to have a clinical Ph.D.
Yeah, which is different, and I definitely don't have the expertise for that. So.
Yeah, no, it's very different. So yeah.
Okay, and then your postdoctoral degree was at Columbia University, correct?
Yeah. So my postdoctoral training was I did in both at 2 universities, at Cornell University and Columbia University.
Okay. That's still within the same state, right?
Yeah, they're both in New York. So one is upstate, and then one Cornell is upstate.
Yeah.
And except the medical facilities in Manhattan, and Columbia University is also in Manhattan.
Yeah, North Manhattan. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, about 120th Street. It depends on which college. So for me, it was a teacher's college. So I decided to go there because I learned about the expertise about. I learned about the skills on how the brain could interact and could alter the motor functions, etc. But I really wanted to go into more details, learning about neuroimaging techniques. Yeah. So I went there. The 2 supervisors I had, one of them is considered an expert in neuroimaging, and the other one is an expert in developing intensive interventions. Okay. So I really like this idea of being able to combine both approach, and that was my goal when I first started research, at least my doctoral training. I really wanted to combine both. So I decided to go there for 2 years. I was funded by the government of Quebec. So I stayed there for 2 years. I really learned about everything. So that was a very amazing experience, which I was able to publish several papers. I was able to supervise students, which are a set of skills that is required to become an academic professor. Right. Because if not, then you're not going to receive grants, etc. And it's very competitive to get a position in academic.
That's correct.
Yeah. So I did this from 2017 to 2019. Okay. And then I got an interview at University of Laval, a French university in Quebec, and then Quebec City. And then I received a position, so I started.
Congratulations!
Thank you.
It's very hard.
So I started the position in July 2019.
Okay.
So I was able to develop my own lab for a few months, and then the pandemic hit, which was it's very difficult to start your own lab during the pandemic.
I can imagine so, especially since you have in-person studies that are necessitated for your publications and your work. So. You must have had a lot of logistical complications with all that.
Yeah, but it's good because the people in Quebec City are very encouraging. So that my colleagues, they really helped me to develop my own lab, etc. But obviously, you need to put a lot of efforts to make sure that just to collaborate with the clinicians, the other researchers, to develop your own network. So I started about 4 years ago. It's going to be 4 years this summer that I'm a professor.
Congrats.
So 2023. So yeah.
Okay, it's a very long journey. So it started in 2007 and it culminated in 2019.
Yeah, correct.
I assume you think that's worth it, right?
Yeah, definitely worth it.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't recommend for someone to go in that field or in that track without being aware of all
what's coming.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, for example, an undergrad student came to see me a few weeks ago. Yeah. She's doing her undergrad and a professional master degree, and she's not sure whether she should go in research or practice as a occupational therapy.
Right, which are two different things.
Yeah, exactly. So,
and 2 different degrees and 2 different supervisors, 2 different everythings.
Yeah, it's very different.
Yeah.
So I gave her the opportunity to come in my lab a few days a week for 4 months, so she can learn about research. And then I told her, you should go practice for a few years, and then if you're really interested in research, then you can always come back. So because that's one thing about research, you don't have to go in research directly after your undergrad.
Yeah.
You can take a break, and sometimes it's good because you're learning new stuff. You're seeing more research questions. You're getting experience on the field, especially as a clinician. So yeah.
It's like a maturation process, is what you're saying.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So then moving on to your topics of research with cerebral palsy. Can you give a global overview of what it is? So under what category of disorders does it come under? What's the frequency? What are its potential origins or causes? Is it heritable? The floor is yours.
Yeah. All right. So I'll try to be brief about this, because if not, I'm going to discuss about a few hours. But so basically, cerebral palsy is the most common neuromotor disorder in children.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's a prevalence of 1.5 to 2.5 per 1,000 live births. So it ranges across the world, but it's usually between 1.5 to 2.5. So the advance in medicine help us to stabilize those numbers. So that's a good thing.
That's very good.
Yeah. So what is cerebral palsy is, yes, it's a neuromotor disorder, but it actually happens during pregnancy. Okay. And sometimes up to 6 months or a year after the delivery.
Yeah.
So in that period of time, so about 41 weeks of pregnancy, the fetus can have either lesions or infections or trauma, or the mother is drinking alcohol or drugs, etc. So we know about 30 to 40% of the causes of cerebral palsy. So all
which
these
is pretty
factors,
good, actually.
It's good, but we still have a lot to
Yes,
do.
of course.
So it could be genetics as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very heterogeneous population.
Yeah. And
this is why I love working with children with cerebral palsy, because to quote some medical doctor in Montreal, all the kids, you never see the same one.
Okay.
They're all different. They all have different clinical impairments, sensory motor impairments, cognitive deficits.
Yeah.
So
what you're saying is the disorder is not always the same.
It's never the same. So you have some patterns that you can observe across all kids. Yeah. But it's because you also have the environment factors that you have to take into consideration, whether you grew up in a rural environment where there's no resources, or you live close to the hospital or rehab facilities, or you have access to clinicians at school settings or community settings. So all these factors need to be taken into consideration when you're doing research in this population. But so yeah, for example, a few of the kids can have a brain malformation. Okay. So when you do a brain scan, you can see that half the brain is missing. So
missing in what sense?
It's just missing. There's no neurons. There's nothing. It's just an empty space.
Okay.
So there's no brain activity in that region.
But like the structure is still there. There's just no activity.
Yeah, so the structure is still there, but there's no white matter, there's no neurons, there's no connections, there's nothing. So there's very good pictures that I'll be able to show after, or we're gonna put in the video that shows how the brain is developed in these kids. So that's brain malformations, but there's also lesions, so similar to stroke, etc. So you have, for example, different regions. So for let's say the motor control area, then you can have an absence or a lesion that could alter the movements done by these kids on a daily basis. Right. So it's very different from kids to kids. Okay.
It's interesting that you say that's very exciting that it's a heterogeneous population, because in a lot of, at least in my like field of psychology, heterogeneous populations are kind of not burdensome, but they're problematic because it's hard to establish like causality and any type of pattern to find that. So it's very interesting to hear that you're actually encouraged and like excited about that. So these kids with like these brains that have like no neuronal function, is there not a pattern, but like is there a timeline for like a severity? So like what's like the range of they have a certain like absence of motor function? Is it relational to how much of the brain's like turned off, or like is like what's the severity range of cerebral palsy is actually what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, no. So I'm gonna discuss about the clinical profile, but first I'm gonna really your first question about the when does the lesion occurs? Does it have an impact on the clinical profile?
Yeah, the time is actually
exactly. The timing of the lesion is very crucial.
Okay.
So we know that the features, you start developing, and then you have different pathways that develops over time. So up to the age of 40 weeks of pregnancy, and then it's still developing afterwards through your whole life, not only up to 25 years. That's a myth. So I just want to highlight this. That's a myth. There's critical period that could help to optimize the motor recovery, etc. But so during that pregnancy period, we know at specific timeline that, let's say for example, during the second trimester, you're gonna develop more white matter. So if you have a lesion at that time, then we know that's going to have an impact on your locomotion or your motor function. So it really depends.
And the lesions don't have to be big, right?
It could be a very small lesions. You're still going to be able to see it using neuroimaging techniques. But just a small lesion could have a significant impact on daily practice of activities.
Yeah. So that's like in the pregnancy period. What about afterwards? You said between 6 and 12 months they could also acquire cerebral palsy. Is that the correct term?
Well, I'm not sure if it's acquired cerebral palsy or more like being diagnosed with cerebral palsy.
Yeah.
In that time, it's about a neurotrauma. So you hit your head or something like that could lead to cerebral palsy.
So there has to be some external impact.
Most of the time, yes. There's other possibilities, but it's very rare. So I'm focused more about when you were diagnosed cerebral palsy during pregnancy, but you could also have a stroke. So from the age of 0 months to 12 months or up to 2 years, you can have a stroke, which leads to cerebral palsy. So it's cerebral palsy. It's a very umbrella term to regroup a lot of not disabilities, but sensory motor impairments. So usually what we say is the earlier you have a lesions during pregnancy, the more severe the symptoms will be. So, and yes, I discussed about the heterogeneous types of lesion, but there's also about the clinical profile. I'm sure most of the people in the audience will see or discuss with somebody with cerebral palsy, but didn't know this person had cerebral palsy. So we'll say CP from now.
Yeah, CP.
It's easier this way. So some individuals with CP are able to walk, go up the stairs, go down the stairs with some difficulties. But just like when you're sore when you're going training, after that you're trying to go down the stairs and then it's a bit hard, you're stiff. So that's what some of the kids with CP have.
But that's like the less severe.
The less severe, exactly. And usually there's a relationship between motor functions and cognitive functions.
Yep.
So if
I definitely want to talk to you about.
Yeah, all right. So, and for other kids, they're using a manual wheelchair on a daily basis. They're not able to stand. Some of them are using an electrical wheelchair. So it's a very, very wide range of impairments. Which is all still very interesting.
It is very interesting,
And I agree with what you said. Usually when you're doing science, you need a very strong research paradigm about the inclusion, the exclusion criteria, and that's one of the difficulty in cerebral palsy. It's very wide. Exactly. So you have to find innovative ways to do the stats, to interpret your data. But to me, it also represents the real world.
Yeah, of course.
It's in real life, you're never gonna have 1,000 people that have
the same thing.
Exactly, especially with the environment. So we need to find a way as a scientist to deal with this data and to interpret it in a way that that makes it better or develop intervention following that. So
Right.
yeah.
Okay. Interesting. So then, what is the relationship between cognitive and motor functions?
So yeah, my lab is mostly focused on motor functions,
Yeah.
but I'm a little bit aware of cognitive as well, the impairments that you can see.
Yeah.
So the relationship is, at least from the earlier studies, is there's a direct relationship about the severity of motor functions and cognitive deficits.
Yeah.
So for example, if we take the example I just just said, if there's a kid who's able to walk up or down the stairs with a little bit difficulties, this kid has a good chance to be have barely any cognitive deficits.
Yeah.
So he's gonna go in college.
Yeah.
He can go in college if he wants to. He can get a doctoral training. I actually know 2 people who got a doctoral training.
That's very epic.
CP.
Yeah.
My postdoc supervisor have CP.
Oh, okay.
So one of the 2 has CP.
Wow. Okay. That's
so-
very like stereotype breaking, actually.
Yeah, exactly. I think we have to. Yeah, that's a very good point. We need to stop thinking about, oh, you're having difficulties walking, then you associate this with cognitive deficits.
Yeah.
That's not the case. So it again, the cognitive deficits are very large.
Yeah.
You can have memory deficits, you can have attention deficits, and the more severe, like let's say you're using an electrical wheelchair,
Yeah.
there's a chance that you have cognitive deficits. And I want to highlight the chance. It's not necessarily that you have severe motor function deficits, that you have cognitive deficits. It's not the case.
Yeah. So the motor deficits do not cause the cognitive deficits.
No, correct.
Yeah.
The lesions or the brain malformation cause the either cognitive or motor deficits. It really depends on where in the brain the lesions first appeared. Or
Yeah, of course.
so, yeah. So there's a relationship, but it's not. A relationship doesn't mean causality,
Yes.
and it doesn't mean it applies to everybody.
Yes. Okay. So then, how in like so you said in the best case scenario, with someone with CP, they'll be fully functioning postdoc professors, right? So that's a very, very high end echelon of society. And in the most extreme scenarios, what does their quality of life look like?
Oh, that's a good question. Some of them will have the same quality of life as you and me.
Okay.
So they won't have any obstacles. Some do. So again, it really depends. So if somebody needs a cane or technical aids, they're gonna have to use it on a daily basis. So that could be a limitation for them. So you need to have a good environment where there's a minimal number of steps, there's a wheelchair access.
Yes.
So in terms of quality of life, some will have an excellent quality of life, some will not, unfortunately. And there's a lot of research about trying to improve the quality of life. So the end goal of my research, yes, I'm doing a lot of neurophysiological mechanism up to development of intensive interventions. But the end goal is to improve their quality of life, social integration. So it really depends where you live as well.
Yeah, I was just about to say that. Some places are more wheelchair accessible than others, or some places are more vertical than others. So yes, that does matter a lot.
Correct. And just next time you go outside, just look at your environment and see how accessible it is for an individual with wheelchair. We're not aware of it until you're in that situation or you know someone. It's very tricky. So especially in Quebec, it's a lot of snow during the winter.
Yes.
It's awful for people who has to use wheelchair as a transportation method. But but for individuals with CP, it's sometimes also it's some cognitive deficits will lead to having difficulties to make friends as well.
Yes, of course, unfortunately.
So, but I think now people are more aware and they're more sensitive about that topic.
Yes.
Which is really good. I think we did a wonderful progress over the last 30 years about the integration of individuals with disabilities. So we're more open-minded. So that's a good way. The government is funding more research in that field.
At least here it is.
At least in Quebec and Canada as well. Some places in the States as well.
And we can thank your research for that, actually.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people who's doing research in that field. So.
Yeah. And also, as like a side note, like even in popular media, like CP has come in the forefront in Breaking Bad, actually, right? Like one of the main characters. I know Skylar calls him Junior, but he had cerebral palsy, and actually he had to go off his medication to exaggerate a little bit because he was actually really well functioning. So that was actually well done in that sense. It popularized it and it normalized it as well, and I guess goes on to the stereotype breaking sentiment that goes along. So now there's a huge emphasis on motor movement with this disorder because it's a movement disorder, obviously. So then what does the rehab look like?
Obviously I'm going to discuss more about the current rehab in Quebec. I'm familiar with some of rehabs around the world, but I'll try to generalize. The difficulty with CP, at least when you're not severe, is to recognize that your child has CP.
You mean for the parents?
For the parents.
Yeah.
So it's usually after 2 years of life that you recognize that your child has CP. Okay. So you have the motor milestones. So we know that a child will crawl around the age of 6-7 months. Some of a child will or newborn will walk around the age of 12 months. So you have a motor milestones that says, if after 2 years your child is not being able to walk, then you should probably consult. Yeah. And that's what leads sometimes to, okay, your child has CP.
So is that like a correct or misdiagnosis?
What do you mean?
So you said it might have CP.
Okay.
You mean as like an indicator then?
As an indicator.
Okay.
As an indicator. And then you're going to meet with the doctor, and then he's going to run some tests. He's going to do a MRI, and then you're going to be able to diagnose that this kid has CP.
Okay. And is this diagnostic like time sensitive?
It's not necessarily time sensitive. It's really the apprehension of the limitation you have on a daily basis. Okay. And that's how you're going to know that your child has CP. Okay. So it's not really time sensitive. Some will argue that it's time sensitive in the sense that you have to develop intensive interventions to optimize the motor functions or motor recovery. So that's okay. But the diagnosis is not necessarily time sensitive unless it's severe and it needs technical aids or so that could be. So in terms of like rehabilitation, when you're diagnosed with CP, at least in Quebec, you're going to have some help provided to the parents.
Yep. So what does that look like?
First, how to accept that you have a child with a disability. Yeah. It's not easy. I can speak by experience with my parents. They share me their story. I see a lot of families with a child with disability. It's very hard to accept, and you need to accept it before going forward. You need to find ways to help your child.
Yeah. Because it's a lifestyle change too, right? It's like they have to accept that their expectations have to be shifted and tailored to what's going on right now.
Correct.
And that's difficult for a lot of people.
Exactly. And I'm sure you can tell more about this than me since you have your major in psychology. Okay. So the process to accept something, it takes a long time. Some people will take a month. Some people will take a year. Some people will never accept it.
Very heterogeneous, I would say.
Again, yeah. And so I would say that you start the rehab treatments with physical therapists, occupational therapists at a very early age. So around 2 years old. Yeah. You can see also speech pathologists also. Some of them will have difficulties talking. Yeah. So if you're in a good environment or an environment with a lot of resources, I should say, then you can have access to all these clinicians.
Yeah. So their rehab and therapy in general is very multidisciplinary.
Very. Right?
It's across like many disciplines to help them.
Correct. Yeah. Correct. It usually once a week or once a month that you have treatments.
That's not bad.
It's not bad, but it's not what I was hoping for. Right. That's something but it's like that for every pathology basically. Yeah. After that, you go in school, and that's where it's difficult.
Okay.
Because sometimes you don't have the resources in school. Yeah. So the kid will not improve. Mm-hmm. They will stabilize. Okay. Despite that, sometimes they still need treatments.
Can you explain a little bit more about what that means?
So, for example, if the kid is having difficulties walking, we still need treatment, physical therapy to help them walk better, increase their strength, etc.
Yeah.
So if the treatments are stopping during the
Like when they enter elementary,
when they enter elementary, then it could be
like harmful.
I'm not sure if it's harmful, but it's not gonna improve.
Okay.
Because it's not a CP it's not a it's a non-progressive disorder. So you're gonna get worse, but because of your lifestyle. So you're not walking, you're not doing sports, you're not doing adapted sports. So it's all about a mixture of everything.
Okay. So they enter elementary, and if there's a lack of resources, they if they're not too severe, they'll plateau. But also, if they are severe, they'll plateau, but in a different sense, right?
Correct.
So unfortunately, in an elementary environment, it can be very hostile, right? And that also doesn't help it, and that also negatively impacts like the cognitive and emotional parts of rehab as well, right? Because there's like for the kid themselves, they have to have an acceptance that this is their life and they have to keep doing those things, but it's not very welcoming or motivating when there's negativity coming from their peers, essentially.
Correct. So yeah, we're talking a lot about the negativity, but there's also a lot of positive approaches that happens. So a lot of rehab centers, they try to do a lot of treatments, therapy. I'm talking more about therapies. You also have treatments, medical treatments as Botox, etc. But so you have all those treatments that helps the child to enjoy his life, to be able to do any type of activities. So you have all those type of treatments available, whether it's public or private. So that's another story. But you also have a lot of researchers who are trying to develop new interventions at a young age to help the kids to get better as fast as possible.
Yeah. So then this kind of begs the question. So let's say a school has poor resources. What would be like a minimal thing that they could do to improve the quality of life or just the environment for kids with CP?
Mm-hmm. So school with limited resources, sometimes what the parents could do is to be attentive to their child needs. To be to read as much as possible about what is cerebral palsy, but also to be careful what you read.
Yes.
Because there's also type of treatments that are not good.
Okay.
They should be stopped. But
can you name them, or is that a no-go zone?
Hyperbaric chamber, for example.
Can you explain what that is?
So it's basically you're trying to level you have a threshold about oxygen level, etc. So you go in a tube, and then you control the level of oxygen and other gas. And that's supposed to help the kids' development of the brain. And that's supposed to. The literature is clear on that. It's not working.
Okay. And that still happens?
That still happens. There's still a lot of there's a few researchers who are still doing research on that. But that's also the beauty of research is you have to demonstrate it doesn't work or it works. So my difficulties are what I'm struggling with is when there's private company who's doing this. Right. Because it's easy for a company to target someone in needs, who's anxious, who has stress, so they're gonna go in that. And I know some people who did this, and they told me, "Oh, it helped me." Yeah, but it helped you with 1%. Not significant. No clinical improvements. At least
it could have been a placebo for all we know.
It could be a placebo. So that's always a very tricky topic to discuss with the parents. So yeah, we need to be very careful. So that's why I'm saying when parents are reading online, they really need to be careful. So I highly recommend to talk with the medical doctors, their clinical team to see what are the best options.
Okay. Are there any good online resources for that?
Yes. There's the CP network that has a lot of resources about this. There's also a Blomview Hospital in Ontario that has tons of resources, and obviously there's always the science, the published paper in specific fields. But there's also a possibility to look at what type of research is done in your environment, in your city. So there's a lot of research in CP. Like I collaborate with people from London, Australia, Belgium, New York, everywhere. So major cities has somebody who does CP work. So they can always reach out to those people to see if they have an ongoing project that could be beneficial for their child.
So you even recommend for those who are very information seeking to even reach out to professors?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah. Okay, that's very awesome.
I think it's one of our job actually as an academic professor. Yes, we're doing research, but we also have to transfer our knowledge to the public in a understandable way without going all in details about specific set of research.
Let's just clarify one thing though. You can only recommend, you can't diagnose or prescribe anything, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Because you're not a medical doctor, you're just
correct.
A researcher. Yeah.
Exactly. I have a doctoral training, not a medical training.
Yeah.
So I'm not allowed to diagnose.
Yeah.
So I'm allowed to
suggest or recommend.
Suggest some type of interventions. Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Or point them to specific labs or specific private clinics that you know or have a rapport with. Okay. So, or even schools, however.
Yeah. Exactly. Correct.
Okay. So then, you mentioned virtual reality very early on.
Yeah.
Can we dive deeper into that?
Yeah. So the use of virtual reality it's for me it's really fun, as it's basically you're playing video games. Yeah. And one of the key point to promote brain plasticity, so basically to develop new connections, to promote better motor functions, motor recovery, is through the enjoyment of doing an activity.
So through the enjoyment.
Yeah. So fun, motivation, engagement. And what's the best way to do so for kids is through playing video games. So for me, when I did my master degree, I used a Nintendo Wii. So it was mostly postural control, balance. So we played some games with skiing, snowboarding, and then we showed that the kids, when they're playing in a specific amount of time, they're able to improve their balance after playing the Wii. So
and this is clinically significant.
Clinically significant, statistically significant.
Yeah, which is very major.
Yeah,
very major.
That's that. Some of the kids did not improve, but you look at let's say you have 20 kids, you always do an average of those 20 kids. So some of them were able to improve.
Yeah, and so that was one study, right?
Yeah.
Can you describe like the procedure? How often did they come to the lab? How long were they playing the video game for? Just to like give like a sense of what was the actual environment like for them.
So for that study, it was only one visit. Okay, so 20 minutes. So we were able to look at energy expenditure. We're looking at postural control or balance. But we also did, me and other people, other scientists in the world that did 2 weeks interventions using virtual reality, and they were able to improve.
Which is very short.
Yeah.
So we just finished at the VR portion of your master's thesis. Do you think you could go more into VR rehab in general and what are the overall themes in that direction?
Yeah. So I basically can talk about what I'm doing with VR in my research program right now, which is going to give a good overview of what is virtual reality right now in rehabilitation.
Yeah.
So,
and can we define virtual reality?
Yeah, that's a good point. Virtual reality is very a large term. So basically, it depends on the definition of what you're using. So it could be defined as immersive versus non-immersive. So for example, immersive, it's you have the Oculus, so you have a headset that you totally immerse in the virtual environment using the headset. But it could also be non-immersive. So for example, the Kinect, the Wii, the PlayStation, all these games that everyone is almost playing.
So even like a handheld video game is technically under VR.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
At least in my definition and the definition I'm using. So you have to be specific about 2D VR, 3D VR, immersive, all these terminology. So for me, when I'm referring to virtual reality, it could range from the Nintendo, the Switch, the PlayStation, the Xbox, but it could also be about the use of an Oculus headset. So in the rehab environment, there's a lot of researchers or clinicians that are trying to use virtual reality as a way to deliver treatment.
Yep.
So
in CP, right?
In CP, but all type of pathology as well.
Yeah.
So virtual reality should not replace traditional therapies as physical therapists, occupational therapists. for me, it acts as a way to be a complement, as an adjunct. So it just adds more therapy. So it could be practiced at home or it could be practiced in the clinical settings. The advantage of virtual reality is that we can implement different key components of brain plasticity.
Yeah.
So, for example, if we want to give feedback, are we giving too much feedback? Are we giving not enough feedback for the kids? Is it sufficient? If we provide too much feedback, would he only rely on feedback to improve his performance?
Before we get into that, what is feedback in this instance?
So feedback, think of when you're doing sports. So for example, if you're swimming or you're running, your coach is going to tell you, bend your knees, increase the length of your stroke, breathe on one side, running, all these type of feedback. Yeah. So it could be extremely large in the sense that it could be about your quality of the movement. It could be about the performance. It could be about motivational. It could be about anything you think of. So it's the advantage of virtual reality is you can modulate the feedback given to the kids. So let's say they're skiing and you don't want to give feedback.
In a VR setting.
VR, yeah, that's correct. In a VR setting. So let's say that you have a headset and then you're moving with the headset. You don't want them to rely too much on the feedback to get better.
Okay.
So it's the same in sports. If you give too much feedback to an athlete, he's always going to rely on your feedback to get better. So you have to be cognitively present. You have to challenge yourself.
So that has like an autonomous element.
Exactly, okay. Correct. So for me, it's called faded feedback. So you have to reduce feedback over time. So the person has to rely on himself as well. So you can correct a specific movement, etc. So it is important that the good thing about virtual reality is exactly. So if you're developing let's say you have a custom made virtual reality. So basically you're collaborating with private companies developing your own games. Then you can have the option to say, okay, I'm going to reduce the feedback. So you're not going to have a score 10 out of 10 or 8 out of 10. So you can modulate that. That's one key component that promote motor recovery. But you also have the task difficulty. So think of it in this way that, let's say you're trying to learn how to play guitar.
Yeah.
If you're going to choose a Metallica song at the beginning, way too hard for a beginner, right?
Yeah.
We all agree with this. So what's going to happen is you're going to get discouraged. You're probably going to take back the guitar or you're going to put it in a wardroom and then you're going to forget about it.
You give up.
You give up, correct. But what if it's too easy? All I'm asking you with the guitar is just do some drift. Just go like that.
Just some minor strumming.
Exactly. For months. What's going to happen? Same thing that happens to the person who's too difficult.
Although they'd also probably get angry, right?
Exactly.
So the emotions shift a little bit.
So you have all the emotions for different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So what is important in rehabilitation is always to have the just right challenge. So it's easy enough that you succeed 70% of the time, but it's not hard enough that you do not succeed at all. So that's why it's called the just right challenge. It needs to be challenging enough so you're fully committed. And that's one of the difficulty in traditional therapy is it relies on the clinician, the interaction between the clinician and the child.
Right.
So the clinician has to know, okay, it's too easy, it's too hard. Is he going to get unmotivated? Is he going to cry? Is he going to yell?
I have a question about that. Is that in the middle of their activity or just when they're reporting back to the clinician how it's going?
So it's during and after.
Okay.
So it's all about a combination of trying to have the precise level of difficulty during the intervention, but also afterwards. So you can always ask the child, was it too difficult? Okay, I'm going to change game. I'm going to decrease the difficulty, etc. So for me, virtual reality is one of the best options for controlling that. Right. And that's what we're actually trying in my lab with some colleagues is how can we modify the task difficulty based on the child's perception of emotions. So we're basically putting a camera trying to read the face, the emotions through on the face, and say, okay, that's too difficult. So that's where we're using machine learning, deep learning, artificial intelligence. We also have physiological measures, heart rate,
skin conductance.
Skin conductance. Yeah. I was looking for that word, so thank you. So we're all trying to do that. It's a very challenging way to do it, but I believe that's going to be the future.
Yes.
So imagine if you're playing video games. Forget about rehab for a second. You're playing video games, and you have the option to always put it at a challenging level, just so you have fun, you don't get tired of it, and it's not too difficult, so you quit. That will be amazing. And I know a lot of companies are trying to implement this, but in rehab, it's crucial because it promotes the brain plasticity.
That's interesting because not all forms of rehab have this like gamification element to it, which, you know, like for if you have like a knee surgery and then you have to go into physio, some people can get very discouraged at like the laundry list of things that they have to do. I mean, some people will get encouraged because they'll regain their autonomy, their functions, and they'll go to the gym and feel different, right? But for this, it's different, right? They have to have like a zone of like proximal development, something like that, and also enjoy it. And now this begs the question, is it lifelong, this type of rehab, or is it at a specific time? Is it most effective at a certain age? Like what are those details looking like?
That's a very good question. I don't think, for me, it will be a lifelong treatment.
With VR?
With VR or any traditional therapies. It's very difficult to target specific age. Some scientists are saying that there's a critical period to promote motor recovery, which is true, but it's not clear what age is the best to optimize motor functions.
What makes it difficult specifically? To detect like the critical period, if that exists.
You need a very strong research paradigm for that. You need neuroimaging techniques, and you need basically, if you're looking, let's say, from the age of 5 to 21 years old.
Okay.
Let's say we're building a project. We're trying to answer your question. So we have kids with CP, aged from 5 to 21. Now we're trying to say, what is the critical period of having an intervention that optimizes motor recovery, brain plasticity? First, you need the money, which is always challenging in research. And then you need at least 20 kids per group of age.
Okay,
because you want to say from 5 to 7 to 9, depending on the scientific literature. So you want to have at least 200 or 300 kids who are playing video games on a specific amount of time. Then you want to do neuroimaging before, after, to see if it changes.
Not during?
You could also do during as well.
But I assume it's a bit more difficult.
It's
right?
You need a functional MRI.
Yeah, which is very expensive.
It's very expensive, and there's tons of possibilities to do. So just in that sense, I would estimate a project at least a few $1 million just for that.
And spanning across how many like years?
That's also the question.
Yeah.
And how you're gonna recruit these kids.
Yeah, at all at the same time, and then do the study, and then maybe even follow up afterwards.
Correct.
Right, because there's the problem of attrition rates as well, and that's like that just kills all your data. Okay, so that's but basically, is there still something to find from the data? And right now is like, is there a critical period? Is there any evidence showing for that, or what's it against?
Yeah, so there's no critical period as per se for now. I think all time is good. Whether you do it at 12 or 18, it's always going to have a positive impact if it's well-constructed interventions. So let's say, for example, we're using VR. In my lab, we're using the Oculus Quest. So we're developing some games that incorporates all the key components. It's called motor learning principles, basically. Yeah. So how to use different principles to promote motor recovery. So for us, whether you do it at the age of 5, 12, 18, it's important.
Yes.
We have ongoing projects that in Montreal, with one of my colleagues in Montreal, that we're doing a 2 weeks intensive intervention. We're mixing both traditional therapies with clinicians, and we're using also virtual reality. So we're combining both. So it's a 70 hours training camp in 2 weeks, which is the equivalent, at least in Canada, of a year and a half of therapy, but
Wow.
in 2 weeks.
Wow. Okay. And
So
what's the sample size looking like?
now we're this summer, the summer 2023, we're recruiting 7 kids with CP.
Okay.
But this project is going to last at least 5 to 7 years. We aim to recruit at least 50 children with cerebral palsy. And now at the end, we're going to be able to say, okay, this led to better improvements on motor functions.
Right.
So we're using virtual reality for that group of age, which is 6 to 17 years old. So they're doing about 20 hours of virtual reality within that camp. But we also have other projects that we're trying to incorporate virtual reality in community settings. And that's the rehabilitation continuum. So you go in a rehab, you get treatments, and then you go to school, you reduce your number of therapy. But afterwards, you also need therapy in the community settings. You have to make sure, like at the age of 18, 19, you go to university, there's no more therapy unless you pay. That's the issue. So some community settings have offered for individuals with physical disabilities, including cerebral palsy, that they can offer therapy over a 7 weeks period or 10 weeks period, depending on where you are. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to implement virtual reality in these camps. Because I discuss about all those motor learning principles, but it's also virtual. One of the main advantage of virtual reality is you can develop something that is not accessible.
Yeah. I mean, it's the limitations are like kind of very, very high. Like you have a very high roof of what you can do, what environments you can set up, the timing, the applicability, the challenge, right? So that's something that like the real world has struggles with, I guess we can call it, right?
Yeah. Well, there's limitations about virtual reality. The limitation is the budget.
Yes.
That's it.
In what sense?
That in a sense that it's super expensive to develop games nowadays.
Okay.
You need good programming skills, you need good arts, you need good graphics, you need somebody who understands what is crucial for rehabilitation.
Right.
So for us, we're collaborating with a private industry in Montreal that help us to develop games. And I'm always amazed by their company is rather than just programming, it's a drag and drop feature.
Yeah.
So you have the Oculus Rift on your head, and then you have a Canva, and then you have imported assets, or you can buy assets. What I mean by asset is a chair,
Yeah.
a table, anything, name it.
So Canva is kind of like a room that they're in once the Oculus is on their face.
Correct.
Yeah.
So you can choose different canvas, or you can make one, and then you're in that game, and you have the controller in your hand, and then you just select, okay, I want to have this chair, I want to have it blue, I want to increase the size. Yeah. So we're developing games in a day with this technique.
Which is very quick, actually.
It's very quick.
Okay. So then since we talked about difficulty being an important, or challenge actually, being an important aspect of rehab and motor improvement, what is like the least difficult game to like like an average game, and then one that's like really challenging?
I guess it would depend on the kids.
Right.
So if let's say I'm going to take examples of my game. Okay. I'm going to take one game that we developed in collaboration with the private industry. It's basically we're trying to throw a ball on a target.
Okay. Like baseball?
Baseball, tennis. We're offering the possibilities of having different type of balls. Remember, it takes 1 minute to change the ball.
Yeah, because it's drag and drop.
Drag and drop.
Yeah.
That's simple. So what we're doing here is for the kids with CP, so the kids we're studying, they're having hemiparesis. So
they're having what?
Hemiparesis.
Can you explain what that is?
So it's basically unilateral cerebral palsy. So it means that the deficits are observed on one side of the body.
Okay.
They still have deficits on the other side, but very little.
It's very like specific to that side.
Exactly, correct. So they have sensory deficits, motor deficits. So for example, if they want to grasp a pen, it's going to be difficult with that hand. So we're developing games for them to maximize the use of the affected hand.
Yeah. So then the game has to be good on just one side.
Or with this technology, we can modify it, alternate it like that.
That's really cool. That saves a lot on study time, recruitment issues, attrition issues. That's very good. That's something that's very, I guess, unique to this type of therapy, because in other types of contexts, it's very physical, so it's time limited, whereas it's very accelerated.
It's accelerating when you know how to do it.
Yes.
So I don't think we're there yet for the clinical settings. But going back to your question about having a game that is easy to a game that is very difficult, for example, if I have a kid who's able to grasp a ball in the VR game, so with the hand controller, so he's going to grab the ball and he's going to throw it.
Yeah.
So let's say the kid has some difficulties of throwing in real life. It's going to be easier in that game because I'm going to increase the size or the width of the target. I'm going to bring it closer to the kid. I'm going to increase the size, the area. I'm going to increase the size of the ball. I'm going to be able to do all that. The kid is having difficulties to, let's say, to reach laterally to grab a ball. Well, I'm going to bring the ball closer to him.
And then you can kind of push him more outwards, right? And that's where the challenge and the development comes in.
Exactly. So let's say I want to make it impossible for him.
Okay.
I'm going to put the ball that he has to jump a feet high, grab the ball when it's in the air, and then I'm going to make a very tiny target at the end, very far. So he has to be very precise.
Very focused.
Very focused. So basically, he's never going to have it. And then I'm going to have the just right challenge. I'm not going to have it.
You're just going to reduce it slowly and slowly.
Exactly. So that's the beauty of virtual reality, is we can do all of that. So that's one of the example. But we also did a egg hunting game.
Okay.
So he's on an island, immersive headset again. He's walking across the island. There's a log house, a cabin house, and then he has to find all those eggs.
Okay.
Then we make different colors. So again, we can make it very difficult to find the eggs. We can make it easy. And
you can put them wherever you want.
We can put it everywhere.
Like floating on the ground, etc.
Exactly. And then let's say with that child, I want to make sure he's practicing the reaching aspect.
Right.
Because he's having difficulties. I'm gonna make sure in the VR environment, I'm gonna put eggs at the right level so you can practice this type of movement. So it's very similar to traditional therapies. You have to reach, but now you have the fun environment that you can modify it easily.
Yeah, and that makes me wonder, how excited are they to do these tests? Do they respond really well? Are they annoyed, or like what is their reaction? Like, how is it received?
Mm-hmm. I think overall, from what we got from the kids that we collected so far for our studies, they're very excited. They're very motivated, but it also depends. Some of the I wouldn't hide that some of the kids don't like video games.
Oh, interesting.
So it happens. So,
and then after that, how do you go about it?
Well, if it's a VR intervention, then his data is not going to be good.
Okay.
But that's also what happens in real life. So that's science sometimes. So that's why you need a big group. So if you have 30 kids and then you have one or two that doesn't like it, but that's okay. You're still showing a group effect. So that's good.
Okay. So you've described the environment very well. Now, how effective is it?
How effective? It really depends what you're trying to do.
Okay.
So we're showing in one of our study that you can increase social integration. Okay. So they feel more comfortable talking with avatars, online avatars. So it helps them to discuss with other people.
Okay.
So it reduces their shyness about, I'm able to talk with somebody else. We also we're trying to show right now, our preliminary data is showing that some of the kids are able to improve motor functions. So for example, unimanual functions, able to grasp an object. He's going to be more precise. He's going to be faster. Some of the kids improve, some of the kids don't improve. So we're trying to understand what are the factors that are limiting the improvement. So one of the challenge is we have all those type of games. We have to make sure to understand the games, but also the individual needs.
Right.
So we can match the games based on their needs.
Yeah.
For example, if one of the girl wants to tie her shoes, one of the kid, she wants to tie her shoes, but she's having difficulties to grasp and to do an extension of the wrist. So what I'm gonna do is, okay, your goal is to be able to attach your shoes. So I'm gonna deconstruct the movement. Okay, it requires that you do a full extension of the elbow, the flexion of the shoulder, extension wrist, etc. And then I'm gonna see what are these movements, what type of movements can be done in a virtual reality. I'm gonna select which games is suitable for her, and what type of game she likes also. So it's a very it takes a lot of time to do all of that, but at the end I'm gonna be able. And I didn't practice the shoelace. I didn't practice attaching a shoe. I practiced the movement required to do that task.
Yeah, because it's a virtual shoe.
It's a virtual. Oh, it doesn't need to be a virtual shoe.
Okay.
It could be I'm practicing throwing a ball.
Yeah.
And I'm putting parameters in the virtual reality that she needs to over exaggerate her throwing. So basically, she's doing a full extension of her arms.
When previously she might have had difficulty with that.
Correct.
Okay.
So that's all that you have to think of when you're a clinician or a scientist when you're developing games.
Okay. And so you have a background in neuroscience. Can you talk about the neuroscientific things that go along with those extensions, and how does that help with their recovery, and what is the link between, vision and motor stuff? Because this is a very visual thing that's going on, but at the, I guess, on a unconscious level, they're doing something innately. So what is the relationship there? I know that was a lot of questions. You can break it one at a time.
That's fine. So I'm going to step away from virtual reality to answer that question. I think it's going to be easier in that sense. So during my postdoctoral training, we did a 90 hours intensive camp in 3 weeks, 30 hours a week of traditional therapies. So it's basically binaural therapy, where you always have to use both ends to complete the task. And remember, some of the kids are having difficulties to do a specific movement because they are in triple flexion. So when I say triple flexion, it's the wrist is flexed, the elbow is closed, and the shoulder is a little bit high.
Are they locked?
It depends on the muscle tone disorder. So for example, if you have spasticity, which is depending on the velocity. So basically, if you move too fast, your muscle will contract, and then you're going to reduce your amplitude. Okay. So it's not necessarily lock. You can work on that. Physical therapists have been known to work on this. You can use Botox as well to reduce the muscle tone disorder. So you have to do all of this to help the kid.
Right.
So you have a lot of traditional therapies that we've been doing in New York where I did my postdoc, but we're also doing the same here. And what we were able to show is we were doing neuroimaging techniques. So MRI, magnetic resonance imaging. So we're reconstructing the brain in 3 dimensions. So we're looking at different pathways. So when I'm talking about pathways, think of a cable starting from your brain to your hand. Yeah. So it's neurons, basically. Yeah. So that's going to be able to control your hand. So we know specific regions of the brain is controlling your hand. Yeah. So that's called a homunculus. So specific. Yeah. I'm sure you remember your classes.
But for those who don't know, what is the homunculus? Well, we can add an image, obviously, but what is that? What is the theory behind it?
So basically, it's a specific part of your brain that controls all your body. Yeah. So you have a huge head because you have control of your nose, your mouth, etc. You have hands. So it's basically a little human, disproportionate human in your brain. Mm-hmm. Again, it's just an image that says, okay, this part controls your hand, this part controls your feet.
Specific regions control specific movements, right?
Specific segments of the body.
Yeah, correct.
Because movements is also different parts. Yeah. So, but it's also all combined.
Yeah.
So what we were able to show is after a 3 weeks interventions, some of the regions were able to increase the connectivity. What I mean by connectivity is the neurons that is activated in a specific regions. So I didn't do the activity, brain activity. I did more like about the integration, the integrity of these neurons.
Can you expand about that?
So yeah, so we're looking at white matter integrity of
What does white matter do?
yeah. I'll give two examples that I usually use to describe what is white matter. The first one is, you know, the electricity wires you have.
Like right here.
Yeah, like here, it's already covered in specific materials. And why it's covered, it's because to transmit the electricity faster. That's the only reason.
Yeah.
One of the reasons. It's also to be safe. So it's the same for white matter. So it kind of, you have the wire or the neurons, and then you have white matter surrounding it. So it conducts the electricity faster so you can do fast movement. So a reflex is full of white matter. It goes instantly or almost. Some movements or that is required doesn't have much white matter, so your movement is going to be slower.
Can you give two examples? So like one, which one is a white matter movement, or one's more of a gray matter movement?
I wouldn't go in the difference between white and gray matter. Basically, is the body of the segment of the neurons. So it's just a terms to dissociate the brain. So whether you see white or gray matter, the gray matter is really the soma, the body, the base of the neurons, whereas the white matter is really the conduction through the neurons. So that's what I'm mostly interested in my lab, is the white matter integrity of the different regions. Another good example to describe what is white matter is multiple sclerosis.
Okay.
We know that most cases in multiple sclerosis usually appears around the age of 40, 50 years old. And then you can see a progression of that disorder over time. So you can tell somebody who has multiple sclerosis, let's say he's got diagnosed, and then over the years, he's going to have difficulties to walk. He's going to be slower in his movement. That's actually multiple sclerosis attack the white matters.
Right.
So you see a decline over time. So it's the same for cerebral palsy. The lesions alter the integrity of the white matter. It's not a decline, it's not improving over time if you're doing nothing. But what we showed in our lab and during my postdoc is that we're able to increase the white matter integrity of specific regions.
Which region specifically?
Yeah, so for my case, during my postdoc, we did the corpus callosum. So the corpus callosum is a region in the brain that connects the two hemispheres. So left side of the brain, right side of the brain.
It's like a bridge.
It's a bridge, correct. And in that corpus callosum, you have different regions for the motor area, sensory area, cognitive areas, everything you can think of. It's basic goes through there to connect the two hemispheres. So what we showed after 90 hours of training of biomineral therapy is that we're able to increase the white matter integrity of the motor area.
That's amazing.
It's amazing. It's hopefully it's gonna change the way we give treatments, but it also helps us to validate our therapy.
Right.
Because yes, you can look at clinical measures. Yes, it did improve time, precision. But if we're able to back this up by a change in the brain, then that's going to be very helpful in the future. Now I showed these results. We're one of the first people who did this in cerebral palsy. But one study is not enough. And it could be also because of methodology, the way we did this. So a lot of people have questioned this in a sense that, and it's okay. That's how science should go. And even nowadays in my lab, I'm still questioning my old research. I'm trying to increase our methodology approach. We're trying to do a new innovative way. So we're all trying to do that to ensure that's really these results we obtain. I know there's few other people across the world who are studying this.
That white matter specifically in the corpus callosum?
Of the corpus callosum. Yeah. It could also be the different pathways to control the movement, the sensory feedback. So where a lot of people are trying to do this.
Okay. And how have the results been?
So far, so good. But one of the difficulty is the MRI that we're using. First, you have the equipment, the MRI. Okay, so you have different companies, Siemens, Philips. So you have those two big companies and others. So if a team from Belgium, a group of scientists from Belgium is using the Siemens one and I'm using the Philips one, how can we compare our data?
Yeah.
Can we? If so, how? There's different ways to do it. So the results so far are pretty interesting, but it's hard to arrive at a definite conclusion. I don't think we're going to be able to do that over the next 5 or 10 years. I think we need to rethink of science before doing this. So, for example, data sharing.
Yep.
That's something that we need to do. Open science.
Yeah, that's a big topic, and especially the medical fields. Right?
Correct.
Because you publish papers, and we assume the data is all equal, and that there's a fidelity of data, but realistically, there needs to be some type of either data sharing, maybe even data auditing, right, to have a true holistic picture of it all.
Mm-hmm. But exactly, and that's something I really want to move forward. That I know it's going to be helpful, especially in my field, since we have limited number of participants. So you have the equipment, and then you have the methodology you're using to extract the data. How are you going to filter the data? What type of filter are you going to use? All that is very important. And right now in CP, no one is using the same methodology. It's not a limitation though. It's also an advantage. Maybe someone's have a better methodology. So we're trying to develop, we're hoping to submit a paper in the next month or so about the methodology of what we're doing here.
So is it like a meta-analysis of like the methodology, or what type of analysis is it?
We're just showing our analysis.
Okay.
So we're collaborating with an excellent researcher in University of Laval. So that's a city in
What's
Quebec.
his or her name?
Maxime Robert.
Okay.
So he's excellent. He's one of the best in this type of analysis, but he never studied cerebral palsy. So he's very known in typically developing children, healthy adults. So we approach him. He's a mathematician, scientist. So we approach him saying, hey, we need your help. Can you help us? And then that's why I was saying earlier, the multidisciplinary approach is extremely important.
Yeah.
So what we're showing in our papers is that we are able to reconstruct most of the pathways in the brain. We identified 40 or 45 pathways that is important to us.
Which is a lot of pathways.
It's a lot, especially in cerebral palsy. We're always using the same 3 pathways.
Which are?
The ascending pathway, the descending pathway, and the corpus callosum. When I'm talking about ascending and descending pathways, is the motor pathways and the sensory pathways.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you touch an oven that is hot, you're going to have a nerve, the sensory nerve that's going to say it's warm. It's going to go up in your brain, and then it's going to trigger some area that says it's hot. And then there's going to be a descending pathway, that's a motor pathway that say you have to remove your hand before you burn yourself.
Right. So
these pathways are full of white matter.
Yes, because they're fast.
Because you have to be fast.
Yeah.
Correct? So that's usually these 3 pathways that are studied. There's a few others, but now we're showing that, look, we were able to reconstruct 40 pathways. And one of the reasons people were not able to do it until now is lack of resources, etc. But it's also because of methodology. Okay. So it was not there yet. Now we have new methodology. We're able to develop a few things. The mathematician has helped us tremendously. Computer science also. So now we're able to do all of that. But we're still facing challenges.
As always.
Think of it. I said earlier about the cerebral palsy is missing half the brain. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, in the worst case, it's missing half the brain. Sometimes it's missing, partially. Partially. Sometimes 5%. We never put numbers just to better illustrate for those who are listening to us. So think of it. You're missing a big portion of your brain, and then you're trying to identify pathways that goes through there. It's impossible. Yeah. Or sometimes you create a model. So basically you incorporate a model.
Like a math model or a computational model?
It's both.
It's both, okay.
Yeah, it's a map and a computational model. So you're using these 2 approaches in healthy adults. It works, because, of course. But then you're applying this model to somebody who's missing a portion of their brain. Right. So it's not working. So you have to go back to the programming, you have to develop new techniques. So that's why it was very difficult. And my lab is doing this, but there's other labs who are excellent at this. So I know 4 or 5 labs who are actually working on that right now.
Okay. And are they all working together, I assume?
We're exchanging, we're
Okay.
talking, we know the limitations.
Mhm.
It's kind of a race also, who's gonna first publish. That's how science works right now. But we're hoping to collaborate all of us together after, to share data, to see how can we improve.
That's a very healthy approach to science, because there's sometimes there's a possessiveness to data, right? And so the collaboration is actually very beneficial for not only like the research element, but also those with CP, right? Like they benefit a lot from that. That informs the clinicians. So it's very humanistic what you guys are doing. So now I was holding this question for a long time. So so you identified pathways that you have reconstructed, as you said. Are they permanent reconstructions, or do they require consistent consistent practice and therapy to maintain those connections?
That's an excellent question. It's partially reconstructed.
Okay.
It's not fully reconstructed. Because if you compare, let's say, the white matter integrity of the corpus callosum compared to typically developing children, it's still not comparable to typically developing children. Now the question is whether it lasts, these effects. We don't know.
Don't know.
We don't know. It's too expensive.
Yeah.
Think of it, it's $500, $1,000 to have one MRI. Now you're gonna need multiple. You're gonna have to control what the kid does on a daily basis, his environment. There's so many factors that can have an impact on that. So we do not know if it lasts. We hope so, but there's no studies who are showing this as of for now for CP.
Right. And just to add to the difficulty, there's no real animal models for CP, so you can't actually do some type of real like invasive or maybe causational analyses on like mice per se. So you have to actually just work specifically in humans and maybe combine some computational methods to see how it goes about. But it's as you said, it's very money limited and time limited, and also maybe even attrition limited, right? Like they might feel better and be like, no, I don't necessarily want to be part of the study, right? So do you have a hypothesis as to what might maintain those connections?
I think to maintain this connection, you have to be active.
Yeah.
That's the key.
Or more active than you were before the rehab, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
But even that, how do we know he was not active before?
Right. That's always a caveat.
Yeah. So one of the in cerebral palsy, what we often observed is that children are not like, they're training. Let's say they're training bimanual therapy. When they go back home, they're still using their less affected hand.
Yes.
So it's a non-use. So they're losing that. So what we need to emphasize is, even if you're going back home, you still have to use both hands. And that's very difficult to control. The parents needs to be involved. The kids needs to be motivated.
So we've highlighted a huge like technological aspect in rehab. With reminders, can let's say like an Apple Watch help with reminders to have like timed, scheduled, or maybe not, but just reminders in general of today, maybe use your hand this amount of times, right? Like there's reminders of like, get up and walk and get up and drink some water. So can that be like not targeted, but like specified towards them?
Yeah. So we have a group of researchers in Quebec City who are doing this right now. They develop a watch that have accelerometers, so it tracks how you move your arm through the day, and then it sends you a reminder, please use more your arms. So that's one of our projects actually. These are very good, so it reminds the kids to move their arms on a daily basis. So we hope with that it's gonna maintain the level, the improvement they did during the camps or during the intensive. So that's I started this during my postdoc. We had a patent about this.
Oh yes, that's right.
But a lot of people are developing this as well. And to be fair, there's a lot of people who are much smarter than me, and they have the expertise in this field. So
Of patenting or the device making?
the device making,
Okay,
it's not my expertise at all. So it was just an idea I had during my postdoc. We developed it, we sold it. It's fine. So we were very happy. But now in Quebec City, a lot of people. There's one engineer, scientist engineer, who's developing this, and we're using this during our summer camps with those kids.
Okay. And how many kids are going to be using these watches or devices?
So this year, I believe it's going to be 8.
8? Okay.
So they're going to go back at home, wear this for a couple of weeks, and then we're going to see, we're going to make some relation between our data, and we're going to see if it help them to maintain their improvements.
Okay. And another common theme in medical types of research is problems with voluntarily doing things, right? So, and that applies in both like research settings, clinical settings, and also just showing up to doctor appointments, right? Like these massive stats of the cost to society of no-shows, right? So in the CP population that's been recruited, what are their attrition rates? Are they very willing to study, and are they very, very willing to be followed up for these studies? Like, what's their participation rate like?
Mm-hmm. I would say it really depends on where you are located.
Okay.
That's the first thing. So, for example, when we were in New York and we said, hey, there's a 90 hours intensive interventions, we recruited over 20 kids a summer.
What was the compensation for 90 hours in 3 weeks?
None.
None.
You mean financially?
Yeah.
None.
None. Interesting.
But think of it. In New York, you have to pay to get treatments. You have to pay for therapy. We're coming from Quebec, that everything is free.
Yes.
So that,
or at least publicly, it's free.
Publicly, yeah. So for them to get 90 hours for free,
it's a steal.
It's a steal.
Yeah.
So,
unfortunately,
yeah. There's pros and cons. It's a good thing for research because it's easy to recruit. Mm-hmm. But overall, the families with children with cerebral palsy are very busy. They always have appointments, medical appointments, occupational clinicians appointment. So they're very, very busy. So it's very difficult to recruit children with cerebral palsy. Yeah. And I understand. And ethically, it's okay also.
Yes.
We cannot force them.
Of course not.
So yeah, I think I'm in a good position. I'm the vice president of the local committee of ethical board in Quebec. So I'm fully aware of it. Scientists should be fully aware. I hope they are about the ethical approach. So we're asking them. If they say no, then it's okay also. But I would say, personally, I think it's very, very difficult to recruit because, as I said, the parents are busy, the kids are busy, they don't want to miss school, and I understand. So you have to be okay with that when you're going into pediatric science.
Yes.
You have to be, like I told all my students, if you need to collect data, be free during the weekends.
Yep.
And the evenings.
Yeah.
It's that simple. When I recruit all my students, I tell them, if you're not willing to work during the weekend, don't come in my lab.
Yeah, which is very, very nice of you, actually, because you're being very transparent about the demands of the job, let's say.
Correct.
Yeah.
So during my Ph.D., I think I was for a full year at the lab every weekend because I was recruiting.
Right.
So, but that's how it is.
But that's how it is, and that's what you signed up for, and it's okay, right? Like some research doesn't need to be like that. Like when I was working in Dr. Jeffrey Mogul's lab, like I didn't have to show up on the weekend. I could if I wanted to, but no one was there, and I'd have to like sign in and all that. So it varies, right? Mm-hmm. So you mentioned parents, which is a thing we actually kind of skipped over. How can parents support their kids with CP?
I think the first thing for me is to make sure the parents are okay with this. Yeah. So I can speak from an experience as since I grew up with an amputation, and my parents told me, and I spoke to a lot of people about, I help a lot of parents also saying, okay, your kid's gonna have this problem. So I think psychologically we need to help them. That's the first thing. You need to be aware of the limitation. If there's any limitations, you need to be aware of resources you can have access, all that you need to be aware of what is your child thinking
Yeah.
about his handicap. That's very crucial because you're going through phases, and I can speak from personal experience that sometimes you're gonna be upset that you have a handicap. Some like at the 14, 15 years old, you're gonna have questions like, am I gonna be able to find someone like a boyfriend or a girlfriend?
Yeah. You mean those with a disability?
Those with disabilities, everyone's gonna question themselves about this. So you're gonna have to accept your differences, which is okay.
Yeah, it's a nice thing she said differences and not limitation.
Yeah, correct. But because I was able to accept my handicap.
Yes.
So if you asked me when I was 12 years old, I would have probably said it in a different way.
Yeah, yeah.
So you need to take all that into consideration. One thing I really like that we use for the amputees in Canada, it's called the WARMs. It's a non-profit organization that helps individuals who have amputation to buy prostheses, etc. Is they have a really good matching system.
Okay.
So what they do is, when there's a new family coming in the nonprofit organization with a child with a missing leg or arm, they're matching this family with a family who has a teenager or adolescent with an amputation, and then they can share their experience.
That's really
So
good.
it's like
really
act
good.
as a mentor for both the parents and for the kid.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm still doing this nowadays.
That's good, because the sense of community is a very important thing in basically all populations that have any type of disability, whether it's like mental or physical or whatever. Like, they have this communal aspect that's very important to them, right? And group therapy, I think it specifically in like movies and media might be a bit misrepresentative, because it's usually for a specific context, but it's actually very beneficial, right? Because it highlights the fact that they're not others, right? There's other people like them. They have normal lives, and they can connect and make friends, and that's a very important part of recovery, right? Is actually feeling connected with others, because if you feel very isolated in your condition, that's a very easy way to spiral in a very bad spot mentally, and that will also not handicap, but it will harm your situation even more. So
Yeah, correct. And I think that the parents needs to see their kids as not having any disabilities. They need to be aware, obviously, because there's certain circumstances, but they need to put them at the same level as someone who is typically developed.
yeah.
It also depends on the severity, but they need to be. You want to go play with him? Go play with him. You're gonna find ways to play. You're having difficulties to run, then we're gonna adapt the games. We're gonna adapt the sports. It's also a branch of my research program, adapted physical activities, that we're trying to develop new sports. But there's also in Montreal, researcher Keiko, her name, from McGill University, she developed an app. It's called Dewey app.
How do you write that?
Oh, I'll have to check that.
Okay.
I'm not entirely sure. And she developed an app that basically is looking at everywhere in Quebec where there are adapted physical activities for kids with disabilities. So if you're a parent of a child with a disability, then you look online at this app, and then you're like, oh, 20 minutes from my house, there's this type of activities.
Yeah.
So for example, we did paddleboard for individual paddleboard.
Okay.
So we did this for individuals in wheelchair and amputees, stroke, Parkinson, for elderly people mostly, but that was super fun. So
very beneficial.
There's tons of activities, but we're not aware of.
Yeah. And those activities, they also have very residual effects, right? Because then they're outside, they're doing something different, they're not feeling locked inside and feeling necessarily stuck with their disability. So even though it might seem minor, like it actually like opens up the door to some type of new pathway in life and way of seeing things, and also it promotes motor movement, right? Motor challenge, right? And then if they can find a community, as you mentioned, where they do like communal sports, that's even better for their recovery, right? Because then they're able to be motivated to stay on par and all the good things associated with community in sports.
Yeah.
So we've covered a lot of topics.
Yeah.
Now let's get to more like fun, not fun questions, but like more abstract questions.
Yeah.
So if money was no object, what kind of research projects would you want to see?
I have so many ideas. One of the things we're trying to do right now is obviously the access of treatments, like unlimited treatment. Or I should differentiate treatments and therapy. I mean therapy, like clinical therapy.
Yeah.
If I had unlimited money, I would always like go. You can do I have access all the time to this therapy. One thing I really want to do is there's two things. Okay, the first one is I would love to change our ways of doing research in Canada.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is, it's very tricky. It's very difficult to do, but I think with the right person at the right time, we'll be able to do it. And with that amount of money, I want to change that. If you're going in the hospital or rehab center, automatically your data that clinicians are collecting will go in research.
Yeah. Does that already exist elsewhere though?
Australia.
For CP specifically?
For CP specific.
That's very cool.
Yeah. And at least from what I heard, I didn't check in person, but there's few places around the world that works like that.
And in Australia, which universities does that collaboration?
I'm not sure if they do it, but I know there's a big group in Melbourne that are very well known for this.
Okay.
So every time a kid goes in the hospital, whether it's for surgeries, whether it's for therapy, whether it's for Botox, or name it, or clinical therapy, all the data collected goes in a data bank.
Yeah.
And then it's accessible to the researchers. If you don't want to be,
you can always opt out.
You have to opt out.
Yeah.
So I like this way of thinking that you have to sign to be opt out rather than sign. But we have to change our mentality. We have to make sure that it's ethical to do that.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult. So with that unlimited amount of money, I would definitely do this. Like bring everyone around the world, make sure to do something, and think of it. We're gonna accelerate our research by how many years if we do that?
Yeah.
We're gonna have access to tons of data just by one click.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing. And then it's all scientists at different level, like fundamental epidemiologists, all of them.
It increases the access and more like it provides more statistically rigorous methods. It provides potential for treatment follow-ups and seeing how they did, or maybe there was one specific case study where the clinician did something really clever. You can reach out to them and all that. It's a very I think it's very doable. It's just you have to convince a lot of people.
And that's the difficult thing. That's why I'm saying, like, yes, unlimited money, but it's also having the right person to do it. It's somebody and like in the government who can say, okay, I'm gonna change that. It's very, very difficult.
Yeah, of course.
So the second one I would love to do is, we didn't cover that topic, but in my lab we're doing motion capture. Yeah. So motion capture, think of, we're putting markers on your body, little dots, and then we're going to be able to recreate this in 3 dimensions, similar to video games.
Yeah, or like CGI in movies.
CGI movies, Lord of the Rings, Avengers, Marvels. So we're doing this to help the surgeon to make a more decisive type of surgery they should do. So we're giving them the data where they're coming in our lab. We're doing motion capture. We're saying he has limited flexion or muscle activity, and then we're giving them the data, and then they're doing the surgery based on that. So it reduces the number of visits they need after, the number of surgeries often. So what we're trying to do now, and we've applied for several grants. We got few, which is good.
Yeah.
If you can get one grant, it's really good. So what we're trying to do right now in Quebec, at least, is there's 3 big pediatric hospitals. across the province who's doing motion capture for gait. So
What's gait?
gait is locomotion.
Yeah.
That's
That's spelled GAIT.
Correct. That's just a fancy term for science.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do is we're trying to combine all three biggest pediatric hospitals in Quebec to share all of our data to harmonize our procedure, because they're doing something, I'm doing something else. So, and it's just like a matter of we're adding 5 markers on the body, and then we're going to be able to do the same thing.
Which is
5 to
a
10.
lot. Like 5 markers, it sounds trivial, but in these types of contexts, they're very important.
It's very important to look at the gait parameters, so
Mhm.
spatial, temporal,
Yeah.
how fast you walk. So we're trying to develop this right now. So with unlimited access of money, for sure that's
Yeah.
going to be, because yes, we're trying to standard our procedure across all centers, but our ultimate goal with this is we want to have the government of Quebec to reimburse this.
Okay.
So it should be freely accessible to everyone, every kid with CP who needs a surgery to improve their gait.
Can you expand on that? What needs to be exactly openly reimbursed?
So the procedure that they come in our lab, and then we're doing a full, yep, they call this a full gait analysis.
Okay.
So basically we put all the markers, they walk in our lab, and then we're extracting the data from that. But right now it's not reimbursed. So we're trying, there's a few places in Europe that are also trying, but it's extremely difficult to do. So we're trying to do that. So with unlimited resources, I'll be able to hire or collaborate at least with a economic scientist.
Okay.
So how much is going to save the government in long term? We're going to be able to.
Which is a good incentive.
Let's be honest, it's the best incentive for most of the governments right now. So we're really trying to put this forward. So with unlimited resources, that's for sure. That's going to be my to-go project that I would love to do.
That's it doesn't sound too far-fetched, to be quite honest with you, right? It doesn't sound like something that you'd have to like import, like, you know, like different types of like people from different continents, whatever. It's already here, right? It's accessible. It's just kind of locked away through various means, right? Like you need ethics for data, obviously.
Yeah.
So you said you're working with 3 hospitals. How big is that data set, do you think?
Well,
if you know.
On a yearly basis, I know one of the hospitals see over 300 kids.
Yeah, and now you're
for gait analysis.
Yeah, and you recruit 20 as like a good number for a study.
Yeah.
Right. So this is like a huge difference in data, and it'd be a lot more accurate.
Correct.
Right?
So I'm saying 300 kids with different cerebral palsy or foot deformities or Duchenne dystrophy. So all type of population. So let's say 300, maybe they have 30, 40, 50 kids with CP every year.
Right.
So think of it as a scientist, it helps us in 5 years, you're going to have tons of data.
Right.
But it's also for the kids.
Yes. It's always for them, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
You're going to have less treatments. The surgery is going to be much better. The financial burden for the parents with a child with physical disabilities is very high.
Yes.
So there was a paper a few years ago that says in the US for a child with CP, it costs about $1 million for lifetime care.
For lifetime care. So what would that involve?
Clinical therapy, surgeries, medication, all that.
House modification as well.
Yeah,
if it's necessary.
If necessary, right. Yeah, that's a very good
specific point. Transport needs as well. So like renting specific cars, I assume.
Yeah, transportation. Yeah.
And that's $1 million for one kid.
For one kid.
And that's an average.
An average.
And that's for a disorder that has a 1.5 to 2 per 1,000 people prevalence.
Exactly.
So if you add that up, that's quite expensive, right? Mm-hmm. It's a huge burden of cost on those people, right? And any type of alleviation, even of like 1%, would make a huge difference, right? That's quite amazing, I would say. Okay, and then the last question I have, because I think this is a topic that not many people would be very familiar with, is all your papers are in English and you study in a French school.
Yeah.
Can you explain why that is? Are there any problems with that in terms of terminology differences? Because French and English, they overlap, but there's also huge distinctions at the same time. So why is that the case? And do you find that is beneficial or not?
Mm-hmm. There's pros and cons.
Mhm.
So for me, I'm French, obviously. So I really like to. I think it's important to maintain our French roots. I think it's important to keep speaking French, but science is English.
Yeah.
As simple as that. It's the most common language used in science. So it's not a problem in a French university to publish in English.
Mhm.
It's everyone does it.
Yeah.
So the only thing is, a lot of students are struggling to speak in French, at least in Quebec City.
You mean in English?
In English, yeah, sorry.
It's
Yeah.
okay.
That makes more sense.
Yeah.
So if you compare to McGill University,
Yeah.
there's French people who are going there as well, but their English is going to be a bit better.
Yeah, because they're getting their entire education in English.
Exactly. As opposed to some students in Quebec City, sometimes they come from rural areas where they don't speak English at all, so they have to learn their English.
Right.
So I would say that for me, it's not a challenge, but it could be for some students because they have, in addition to doing their studies, graduate studies, which is demanding.
Because they'll have to apply in English.
Yeah, they also have to submit a paper in English. So for us, we submit our thesis in French,
Mhm.
but the papers are in English.
Yeah.
And the university is allowed us to submit the thesis in French, but to add the English paper, so we don't have to translate. So that's good.
Okay.
They're very open-minded about this.
Which is very good because translation is very long.
It's very long, but it's also some terminology. It's difficult as well. You have all those AI, Google Translate, and few that is getting much better at this. But the terminology sometimes it's not. You're not
It's
able.
intranslatable.
Exactly. So all our courses are in French, but some of our books are in English.
Like the required readings, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Some of them are in English, and sometimes even me, when I speak in a few of my courses, I'm gonna say few words in English because I have no clue what it is in French.
It might not even exist, actually.
Yeah, exactly. It probably exists, but and also some of my colleagues do publish in French.
Okay.
So it just it depends of your field. So for example, if you're looking at the French literature in Quebec, well, you better be published in French.
Yeah, or if you're doing that in France, obviously.
Exactly. So it really depends. I think so. I tell all my students that they have to publish in English, especially if they want to go in academics later. If they don't want to go in academics, they want to stay here. I still tell them to publish in English because of my. For me, it's important.
Yeah.
I want to share our knowledge.
Is your CV in English?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right? Like, there's a huge. I don't want to say bias, but there's a huge shift, right? Like you're in a French province, obviously in a bilingual country, teaching at a French university, but everything's like your website's in English, right?
Yeah.
You're like everything's in English, so that's why like I'm highlighting this distinction because it's interesting, right? It's not, and the reason for that is also not very evident at face value.
Mm-hmm. But at the end, it's just a huge benefits to speak two languages.
Always.
So you go to France, you can talk to everyone. Like English is the language that is spoke around the world for at least in science, in my field of science at least. So it's just beneficial to.
Yeah. So in like to like capture it all, like there's just a huge, like if you publish in English, you're contributing to the general like body of science that's all in English, right? And if you were to do that in French, you would just actually be like more invisible, right?
I wouldn't say invisible.
Differently, like you have different attention, right?
Correct. You'll have, maybe you're gonna receive less attention, but you're not invisible. There's a lot of researchers who still believe that French should be the main language in Quebec, that professors should publish in French. But we have to be realistic about this, that if you're publishing just in French, it's going to be extremely difficult to get grants, federal grants, because you're going to publish less often. There's less journals, less impact.
And there's also a difference with like international communications, right? Like if you wanted to work with the professor in Minnesota who doesn't know any French, it's like there's a gap that was created because of that limitation.
Exactly.
So anything else to add to that topic?
Of publishing in French,
Yeah, or just English, like English bias publication.
I think that pretty much covers it. I think it's important. I would say, yeah, to conclude for that, I would say that it's important to publish in English, but it's also important to preserve our French. And that I always invite people to publish in French if they also publish in English. I think it's fair. If somebody wants to publish in French, it's good. I mean, why not? But yeah, if you want to receive the attention, you have to be in English.
You have to be part of the whole body.
Yeah, correct.
All right. Well, Maxime, thank you very much for your time. It was really appreciated. This is a very good introduction to podcasting for me. And I do encourage you to also do that yourself in your free time if you can. I think you'd have very interesting conversations across and invite all the other professors that, I might not know or other people don't know. So yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to our Academy. To support this podcast, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, rate it 5 stars on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and I look forward to bringing you the next episode. Take care till then.